Karen boss story time with the twist of an ending. Try to be lazy and get me to do your job, I'll let you fail. This happened 2 decades ago. My first job was at a fast food chain. I worked hard, impressed the store manager, and got myself promoted. At the time, I was still 17, so I was promoted to team leader with the implication that I would get promoted further when I was older. I was still in high school, so I worked the evening shift, which started at 4 and ended at 12. The evening manager was a good guy who also worked hard and, as a result, had gotten promoted to a store manager position at a different location. Since they needed a manager and I wasn't old enough, they hired a new manager who I'll call Karen. So, Karen is hired and starts shadowing the current night manager, learning the ropes. After 2 weeks, he departs and she is now set to take over. That's where this story really starts. So I normally get in around 30 minutes early. One of my responsibilities is to make a position chart which tells the workers where they're working that night. I need to hand it off to the manager for approval before posting it. As I arrive, I notice that one of our night shift workers is already there. We'll call her Jen. She is sitting in the lobby crying and being consoled by other employees. I always found her to be a bit manic, but she was a nice girl. She had a rough home life, so I don't hold it against her. Come to find out, she had just had a large fight with her mother, which ended with her getting kicked out. So she is effectively homeless. Good reason to be upset. So I ask her if she needs a night off, and she says, nah, she needs the money. I can't disagree and head off to get started. For the night shift, the night manager typically runs the drive-thru register after day shift leaves. There's a few reasons for this. First off, this means that the manager has control of the drawer and the money for the entire night. This eliminates the possibility of employees having short drawers. Second, this also puts the manager as the person interacting with the customers. I lived in a college town, so drunken guys drive through all the time and just want to chat up the pretty face behind the register. Third, it gives the manager the least amount of responsibilities as far as cleanup. So, given what I know now, I make up a position chart and place Karen on the register and Jen on a fryer where she can get help if she can't focus. I walked to the office to hand off the chart to the night manager, and I was surprised that he wasn't there. He normally is in at least an hour before shift just to make sure that everything is ready. That's when I remembered this will be Karen's first night alone. I groaned inwardly. Oh, this is going to be a trial by fire kind of night. The day manager's there, but no sign of Karen. It's now 10 minutes to shift, and even the day manager is wondering what's up. I fill the day manager in about Jen, I show her the chart, and I ask if it looks good. She agrees, and I said that I'll post it for now, and Karen can sign it when she gets in. I had just finished posting the position chart when Karen shows up looking frazzled. She heads for the office without a word to anyone. Meanwhile, people start getting into position and ready for the shift. A few minutes later, Karen walks up, pulls my position chart, and replaces it with a new one. Again, she walks off without a word. According to the new position chart, Jen is working the drive-thru and Karen is working nothing. Her name isn't there. She has another employee working 2 positions and the whole shift working effectively 1 person short. What in the world? So I head over to the office where Karen and the day manager are talking, and I ask for some clarification. I explain that there must be a mistake. Karen says, no, that's right. So I reply, yeah, but you're not in a position and that worker is working 2 positions. Well, how am I supposed to be in charge if I'm in a position? Day shift and I just stare at her blankly. Day shift lead says, Karen, you need to be in a position. You are accounted for in the labor calculations. Well, I have 6 years of management experience, and I have never needed to fill a position to get the job done. Things are going to change around here now. We do things my way now. Now, she just spent the last 2 weeks shadowing a manager that walked her through every step of the job, and she knows that she should be in a position and why. This shouldn't even be a question. She just wants to spend the shift sitting in the office, and everyone knows it. At this point, day shift manager and I are sharing horrified glances at each other. So I tell Karen that she'll need to go get people moved around if that's what she wants, because it's her plan. She gives an exasperated sigh and heads that way. I turn to day shift and I just plead with her to call the store manager and let her know what's going on, and she agrees. I head back to the line and start working. After a short time later, day shift pulls me aside and says that the store manager said that it is Karen's shift, that she is in charge. She makes the decisions, and then she leaves for the night. The shift proceeds to implode in a spectacular fashion. Less than an hour in, the employee working 2 positions is so far in the weeds that orders are taking 3 times as long to get out. The drive-thru is backed up, and the guys stuck at the window waiting are trying to flirt with Jen, who's having none of it and getting more annoyed by the minute. As the wait gets longer and longer, the people are becoming more and more irritated as they get to the window and they're just taking it out on Jen. Things are starting to get out of hand. Karen is nowhere to be seen. I go to the office to let her know, hey, we need some help out here, and I just find her watching a portable TV. I start to tell her what's going on, and she just cuts me off. She tells me to get back on the line, do my job, and stop bothering her. I was about to try and explain when I just thought, you know what? Screw that. Cue malicious compliance. I turned, walked back to the line, and I watched the situation unfold. 30 minutes later, a car at the window is giving Jen an earful about how long that she's been waiting. She calls her worthless, and Jen goes off. She takes the large strawberry milkshake next to her, chucks it at the lady, and calls her a fat, ugly, censored. The lady and the inside of her car are covered in pink goo. Everything went so silent that you could hear a pin drop. Then the lady starts screaming. Jen closes the window on her and walks calmly to the back. The lady peels around the front and comes in the front door screaming for a manager. I go and I knock on the office door, and then Karen appears, looking ticked and annoyed. She tries to snap at me, but I tell her she has a customer at the front asking for the manager. Karen rolls her eyes and heads toward the front, oblivious to the crap storm that is waiting. I went and I found Jen huddled in the back, crying again. I tell her to get herself together and head back to the front when she's ready. I head to the line where the now purple-faced lady is screaming at Karen about dry cleaning and upholstery cleaning, and I want that girl fired. At this point, I can see that Karen has finally realized that things have gotten way out of control. She is trying to calm the lady down, but she is having none of it. Eventually, Jen comes back to the line and the lady starts in on her again, calling her all kinds of nasty things. Karen just stood there and let the woman berate her. Jen just kinda deflated in front of us. Watching her crumble like that just broke something in me. I walked over to Jen and said, you know what? Just quit. You're better than this job, and you can do better. She looked up at me for a moment and then smiled. She lifted her chin, walked to Karen and said, I quit, handed her name tag to her, and walked out. Karen started apologizing to the lady, who now seemed slightly mollified. Then Karen started bad-mouthing Jen to her, saying how she was a terrible employee and how we were all happy that she was gone. That's when I decided that I was better than that job too. I looked at Karen and I said, the only terrible employee here is you, and I walked out. 2 other employees walked out right behind me. We all met with Jen in the parking lot and went to an IHOP where we sat and speculated on how Karen was getting along. Jen told me that that was the first time in her life that anyone had ever stood up for her. The next day, I got a call from the store manager asking for an explanation. Apparently, Karen had struggled the entire night with service. Afterwards, she'd been there most of the night trying to clean and prep for the day shift and had done a really crappy poor job. The story that she'd given the store manager was that Jen and I had planned everything with the intent to set her up because we didn't like her and wanted just to see her fail. Karen had basically blamed the whole incident on Jen and I. The store manager told me that she was investigating to get all sides of the story, so I told her. A few hours later, she called again and informed me that Karen was no longer employed and asked that if I would be coming in that night. I asked if Jen was getting her job back, and she said, No, the whole shake debacle wasn't something she could overlook. I said, well then, my answer is no. She was surprised. She tried to negotiate with me, and I told her that my price was Jen getting her job back. She said she couldn't do that, and that was that. If you're wondering how Jen turned out, I married her. We're very happy and have 4 children. OP showed the story to Jen and thought that she might cry, but she didn't. She said it was one of her darkest days, but ended up being one of the best of her life. What do you think? What would have you done? Boss tries to give disciplinary action for working too hard, posted by Asian Clooney. Midway through my career, I found myself working for the most prominent private college in my state. I was in the IT department and was in charge of maintaining a few servers and all of the technology in the classrooms. Every summer, we would receive our budget for the year, and part of the budget that I managed was spent mostly on upgrading the audio-video presentation systems in the classrooms, and most of that work had to take place during the summer. This is fine normally, but our college administration had created a ticking time bomb for me a few years before. They had decided to spend about $100,000 on a few classrooms, but did not allocate any money in our budget to replace the equipment when it would eventually fail. I had been there for 5 years, and now that equipment was starting to fail. Increasing our budget was not an option, despite faculty growing to depend on the equipment in these spaces. I was left to figure out how to make the same budget replace all of the equipment in those spaces, as well as the normal set of classrooms that would need to be upgraded elsewhere. Fine, I was up for the challenge. I had to simplify and purchase more value brand of equipment and do extra work to cut corners. A couple of weeks of shipping delays for the majority of the equipment saw me with roughly 1 month to rip out, replace, rewire, and configure about 15 classrooms, as well as update and test all of the existing classrooms within about a month before the semester began. Realizing the amount of work ahead of me, I began working. I came in every day of the week for 28 days straight, working 8 to 10 hours to ensure that when that semester began, the professors would have working equipment. I was salary, so I didn't have to clock in. This gave me the freedom of schedule to work as little or as much as required. I worked myself sick and was literally sick at the end of the 28 days. My supervisor was a guy that we recently hired. Let's call him Gus. Near the beginning of the semester, while testing equipment, I realized that the audio driver in a common model of computer that we have in the classrooms was corrupted. Investigating it, I realized that the computer manufacturer had corrupted drivers on their web server where we downloaded it from. I asked my supervisor, who was in charge of managing the image deployment server, to rebuild the image with a non-corrupt version of the driver that I'd provided him, and he said that he would. I swing by the next day and I asked him if he had completed the rebuild. He had not. I tell him that I really need it as the semester loomed closer and closer, and he tells me he'll work on it. Next day, nothing. Day after that, nothing. Finally, he figures it out and I continue my work. He must have not liked being pressured, and perhaps the perception that he was incompetent, must have gotten to him. He decides to power trip and call me into his office and ask why I was working so much. I explained the administrative oversight a few years prior, shipping delays, cheaper equipment, extra required work, and his delaying of a working image. I tell him, hey look, I came in day after day after day asking for that rebuilt image. Each time that I said day, I am poking my finger straight down on the edge of his desk, enough that it makes a sound to emphasize that those delays hurt the work that I was doing. He wanted to find some personal failing that he could pull out of some disciplinary action around. I gave him none. Eventually, he ran out of ideas and I left his office, not thinking much of it. Gus, however, was a brown noser of the highest order. He would follow our IT director like a puppy. He joined a band with my IT director, so my work situation was not exactly fair. The semester began, and not a single issue in all of the classrooms was reported. I was proud of the work that I was able to complete, given the challenges. The second day of the semester, my IT director calls me into his office. There, Gus is sitting beside him, and they both want to talk to me. I don't like the looks of this. My IT director starts asking me about why I was working so much. I explained to him, as I did Gus, the various factors that made this summer's work extra challenging. This destroyed any valid criticism they could muster. Gus goes on to say that he innocently inquired about my work and that I became violent, talking about the gesture that I made on his desk, illustrating his failure to do his work in a timely manner. I demonstrate exactly what I did on the IT director's desk to show how ridiculous of a claim that it was. My IT director wanted to exert his authority, and they would not stop until they had something to discipline me with. Nothing I would say would change the result. I was to be in trouble for whatever transgression they imagined up in this meeting. I make sure to point out how long it took Gus to do the small task that I depended on, knowing that I could have completed it in about an hour. He was incompetent. My IT director then alludes to the fact that I should respect Gus more, as he is my supervisor. Screw it, I think to myself. I then tell my director, it is as if Justin Bieber was trying to teach you about music theory. It's only going to tick you off. This sudden, sharp, and, in my opinion, hilarious comparison was too funny. Both Gus and my IT director immediately laughed their butts off, even though Gus was the subject of this insult. Once they had stopped laughing, my IT director put on a more serious tone. He says that I could manage my time better despite the unique circumstances of this summer's work. His voice gets really soft and slow while he's talking to me now. This is a trick he forgot that he told me that he uses in arguments to make the other person seem like they're out of control. It is condescending, as if spoken to as a child, and now he is using it on me. He tells me that he wants me to take some time management class. Also, to take a couple of days off and think about it. I just want you to think about it. However, he is going to need my keys and badge. Cue malicious compliance. At this point, he has provided me enough evidence that this is not a job that I want to stay at. The absurdity of working so hard and for 28 days straight on salary with no extra pay and to be rewarded with a disciplinary action was too much. That, in that moment, I had thought about it. Without saying anything, I hand over my badge. I took all of the mini keys off of my keyring and set them on his desk. I have thought about it, I tell him in the exact soft and condescending tone he used with me. And you can keep the keys and the badge, I told him with the biggest wry smile on my face. I then walk to my office. He follows me, and I notice his eyes had become glassy, as if he was hurt by the situation unfolding before him. He expected me to capitulate and accept his punishment for a job well done. He kept saying, I just want you to think about, with each time becoming increasingly desperate. And I kept repeating, I have thought about it. He disappears back into his office with his little minion, Gus, to discuss damage control. I quickly pen an email to all my other coworkers, letting them know that I was leaving and that I enjoyed working with them. I had to work quick, as I knew they would shut down all of my accounts very quickly. I packed up my personal effects and left. Gus and my IT director offered to help me, trying to walk back the situation with some small gesture of goodwill, but I was gone. I had been there for 5 years, but I was willing to walk away the moment that he tried to treat me so poorly. I found out a little later that the week before I left, a programmer that we hired had left after he treated her poorly too. I was not aware of the reason that she left when she did, but our office manager shared that she quit abruptly like me without anything lined up given his behavior. About a year later, I hear from the office manager that the IT director had left. Rumor is he was primarily working for another company while in his office at the college, effectively double dipping or making money for 2 jobs while only doing 1. He had been caught doing so and was warned by the administration to stop. He opted to leave instead of owning up to his own dubious behavior. My only regret is that I didn't leave that job sooner. An update. Many comments have mentioned that I did this to myself and I gave them free work, or that I should have not worked myself so hard. I chose to. That was never the issue. That my director discounted the challenges I faced and insisted that it was personal failing was beyond me. I never complained to my director or supervisor about the situation until they tried to discipline me and I had to unpack the circumstances for them. When I started the job, several rooms and event spaces were non-functional and had fallen into disrepair. Issues existed across all of the classrooms. I worked there for 1.5 years to fix all of these issues and return them to working order. Once I had implemented more permanent fixes and solutions, we went from 4 to 5 reported issues a day to a few every couple of weeks. I eventually implemented turnkey automated systems that made my job very easy. At this point, I started assisting Gus in the help desk, and he was the help desk manager. I worked with him and another support coworker to push down the help desk tickets. No one asked me to do this, and I worked very well with them. I helped Gus with issues that he could not fix, and he was appreciative. This was not required of me, but I helped because I had locked down and automated all of my systems. But Gus was lazy, took smoke breaks all day, and made student workers who knew very little, but more than him, try to fix the issues. I did not have a problem with him until I had to depend on him. Years of doing this work had shown me that addressing the issues while campus was empty took a lot less total time, as I had to schedule my work around classes and so on. Though it was stressful, fielding all of the complaints and getting additional pressure from my director if classrooms were not working would be worse, stress-wise. Once the semester began, I was fine. Had I remained, I would have taken time off and coasted through the semester like previous summers. All of that extra work would have been balanced by a lot of days where I took a more relaxed pace and worked no extra hours for months. Some comments mention that I should have used this as a feedback mechanism to management. That is a private sector mentality. Academia works through grants and endowments. Just as I had entered the college to find whole rooms offline, the administration would have let those rooms break down and let the faculty deal with it. I worked so hard because I cared about the work that I did, the faculty I supported, and how that reflected on me. One last thing. When I started working there, I tried a more communicative relationship with my director. Eventually, they got annoyed and left me with no direction. I had to determine my own projects and schedule unless something came down from administration that required our department. Directors in colleges are more focused on high visibility projects and padding their resumes. Attention is paid only when problems arise. I do not need you staying here with me, answering phone calls or processing customers for the rest of the shift. Posted by J-Man U Waterloo. Context: I used to work at a major supermarket in the online grocery department. This happened when I was about 7 months in this position, and about this time, the Delta variant of COVID had arrived, which meant that everyone in the community was scared of getting COVID and didn't want to actually walk into the grocery store to shop. Thus, all of these folks placed online orders for either pickup or delivery. Due to this exceptional demand, our bosses decided to have 20 order slots available to customers per hour for pickup. I worked in the pickup team, and the delivery team was outsourced to a third-party company. Anyways, we have a couple of new colleagues join us, and one of them in particular is of a very young age, 3 years younger, who also happens to be a micromanager and essentially a pain in the butt to work with. We'll call him Andy. Andy loves to go on his phone all the time. Now, mind you, I'm only in post-secondary now, and this happened in early 2021. In our team, we have a couple of roles which are assigned to staff on a daily basis. Sometimes the roles change, but generally they stay the same. Per our specific store policy, there are supposed to be 2 persons in the home area of the team at all times, answering customer calls and gathering all the necessary bins for a person's order. Note that role is given to generally more tenured persons unless they request otherwise and requires additional training from the department manager. One person is responsible for taking out the groceries to the customer's vehicle, and the rest of the staff are usually assigned to collect the individual items off the store shelves per a customer's order. Story. One day, I come into work, and I'm working a full shift, which is 8 hours. It happens that I'm working with newer staff only, and Andy is also working. There is no role assignment sheet out on that day, so no specific roles were assigned. I decide, since I'm more tenured and have had the necessary training, that I would stay in the home area of the team. Andy comes up to me and says that the manager had assigned him to stay for his shift, and he requested for me to help collect items off the shelves for the rest of my shift. Now, note here, it's difficult to be using your phone while collecting customer items, so ideally you want to stay in home base to use your phone. I say, you haven't had the training from the manager yet, and I'm more tenured. Andy says, no, I have had the training. Please go and collect items. I do not need you staying here with me answering phone calls or processing customers for the rest of the shift. Are you sure? All of the order slots are full for the rest of the shift. Yes, it's fine. Now please go and collect items. Okay. Malicious compliance. So I go and start collecting items for future customers' orders, and I return to base after a run, which is hour 1, to drop off the containers with items and grab new containers. Now you can only take so many containers in a cart at once. Andy seems to be managing fine, so I don't disturb him, and I go out for a second run. I come back, hour 2, and Andy asks me to take over his customer phone call. At this point, the customer is arguing over something trivial. But I tell him, hey, you told me that you don't need me to stay here for the entire shift, so I'm going for another run. Andy hesitantly agrees, and I continue with my third run. I come back, hour 3, and there is a queue of about 7 post-it notes, which the anticipated customer wait time is 35 minutes. Yikes! With customer orders on it, and Andy is on the phone with the customer. Post-it notes were used when we didn't have time to print off proper order summaries, and additionally, the policy for waiting times is a maximum of 5 minutes from the time they call. He sees me and asked me to help him process orders, as well as obtaining the required container so the staff responsible for taking orders out could do so in a timely manner. Once again, I tell him, hey, you told me not to stay here and do any of the home-based tasks. I'm going for another run. I come back, hour 4, and there was a long line of 23 post-it notes with customer orders on it. Anticipated customer wait time of 2 hours. Big yikes. And this time, he pulls on my arm as soon as I come in and asks me to help him answer phone calls and process orders. But once again, I refused, referencing what he told me. He let out a massive sigh and called the manager's extension. At this point, I went out to do another run. Halfway, hour 4.5 through my run, I'm interrupted by the manager on duty. Our team's manager had gone home for the evening. He asked me to come with him to help him and Andy in our area to clean up the backlog, as at this point, customers were waiting well over 3.5 hours, which is a major problem. I walk back into the home base and the manager questions me of why I wasn't staying in the home base, taking care of phone calls and customer orders. I tell him the full truth, specifically that Andy had strictly noted that our team manager assigned him and him only to be in the home base managing these tasks, and Andy had sent me out to collect customer items for the rest of the shift in its entirety. Andy rebutted with the fact that he did not say this and that he asked me to help him multiple times and I had blatantly refused. I told both the manager and Andy that I'll be helping to clear the backlog and then going back to do runs. And at this point, I empathize with our customers waiting for 3.5 hours. At the end of my shift, we finally managed to catch up a decent amount, and I did end up staying about 30 minutes overtime to reschedule the customers scheduled for later in the day to the next day's morning slots, double booking the next day's slots while Andy went home already. As a courtesy, I gave each customer that had to be rescheduled a $20 voucher. There were 44 total rescheduled customers. Just as I clocked out, I bump into the manager and he tells and rants to me what a crap show today was. I tell him, you may want to look at the CCTV of our home base. Have a good rest of your night. The fallout. It so happened that I was taking 2 weeks of leave that day. And after the leave, when I went back, I noticed every shift that Andy was doing runs and never staying in home base. Turns out, the manager on duty looked at the CCTV that very same night and heard very clearly what Andy had told me. Conferring with our team manager, they canceled his administrator permissions on the order processing computer, which he had begged our team manager for over 2 weeks, as well as giving him a written warning. However, that didn't seem enough, since while I was away, Andy decided to do this same thing to another staff member and ended up getting a second and essentially final written warning. Plus, he made it on the frequent monitoring list of every manager. Now, at 3 written warnings, your employment is immediately terminated. The days and the shifts that followed after were very pleasant, as there was not a single peep from Andy when he came into work. He directly started collecting customer items without asking. Update: Andy still works there. He still has his admin privileges revoked and is solely collecting customer items, printed with the assignment sheet, i.e. not anticipated to change. Generally, role assignments are written in on the day of. 2. Former manager was laid off as of January 2022 for mistreating the department, including scheduling staff outside of their availability slots, as well as multiple incidents of not following policy. 3. Our team's voucher budget increased 50% for this calendar year because of worse incidents that happened after I left the company. Don't fire the guy who holds the patents. This is my father's story. He had a degree in mechanical engineering, either a master's or a doctorate. It had taken him many years to get, and he was very proud of that. Thanks to his training, he had found his way working for many well-known companies, working primarily with the procedures used to make various things. Over time, he privately began working on an idea that would revolutionize how school and gym lockers worked. See, my father realized that there was a problem with those type of metal lockers. Namely, it was very easy for a person to break into them. What's more, as the lockers were designed, there were multiple exposed moving parts, which meant that if a student put too many books in one, or really anything got against the door, the locker could be jammed shut, making it near impossible to open. So, for several years, Dad toyed with a number of ideas before hitting on a new design which would solve all of those problems. The inner workings of those lockers' locking mechanism would be contained within the door in such a way that 1. It was impossible for someone to shim or break into, and 2. The entire mechanism would be enclosed, and 3. It was, relatively maintenance-free. Now, at this point, my father was the vice president of manufacturing, and apparently there wasn't a clause in his contract that said that if he designed anything while working for the company, then he had to turn that over to them for profit. Dad still approached the company, offering them the design, but they weren't interested. Dad sat on the design for a while before eventually just taking out several patents on them and then forgetting about them. About 6 months after his first attempt at getting the company interested, the parent company's owner and chairman of the board passed away, and the board opted to sell off some of the holdings. The company that my dad worked for was part of that. The new owners were young guys who seemed to think that they knew everything, as young business owners always seem to think, and they set about changing 99% of the way things were being done. At some point, they stumbled across the plans that my father had designed. Now, that's where things turned curious. They really wanted to start producing this new design, but as they didn't have all the plans and processes laid out for them, they had to turn to my father for answers. Rather than asking him how to do it, or licensing the patents, as any reputable company would have done, they ordered him to turn over all of his work, or else they would fire him. Dad stood his ground and refused. The new owners and my father went back and forth, arguing over details for several weeks, before finally the new owners fired my father for insubordination. So, on to the revenge. There may be more to this, but I'm not entirely sure if it's just pro-revenge. It could border on nuclear based on what happened some years later, though I'm not certain that what later happened had anything to do with my father's actions. So after cleaning out his office and packing things in the trunk of his car, my father headed home and made a few phone calls. He must have gone through 8 or 9 different calls before he got in touch with someone who was interested in what he had to say. See, my dad was under no illusions that the company had fired him wasn't going to just make those patented lockers on their own. He also knew that, though the company itself was relatively small, the owners had money, and there was no way that he could fight them. However, a larger company could. So he contacted the major competitors and made them an offer. He eventually set up a meeting with some people, wheeled out the prototype that he'd made, explained how everything worked, and noted that, with this system, the company could revolutionize the way that lockers were both designed and improve both safety and security. What's more, as he was the only patent holder for the next 7 years or so, that company could be the only company to produce them. The competitor jumped at the chance and bought all the patents, both for the design and the process. They even paid my dad a substantial consultancy fee to go out to their manufacturing site and teach their crews how to make the needed tool and die sets to produce them. Less than 6 months after the first company had fired him, their number one competitor was completely destroying them in the market with this new design, and there wasn't a dang thing the first company could do about it. They did try suing my father, claiming that he had stolen their intellectual property, but that case quickly evaporated when they had to admit under oath that they'd never actually signed a contract with him, and there was no requirement that he turn over anything he had created to the company. In the 7 years from when the second company bought the locker design and the process patents, they pretty handily moved into markets that previously they'd been unable to. The first company soldiered on, but by the time the patent had finally expired, they were a shadow of their former selves. The new owners had sold the company at a loss, with the competitor buying it, only to shut that production facility down due to redundancy. Put maybe 200 people out of work, though given how they'd lost so much business, I wager it was far less than that. So yeah, the new guys don't want to play ball, threaten the guy that holds the patents on something that they want to do, and then fire him, only to have him take everything to their competitor and effectively put them out of business. I was asked that, I don't know what the degree level was. Well, my father and I had a very difficult relationship. There are some very good few memories I have of him, and it wasn't until shortly before his death in 2007 from a stroke that I really started to connect with him. I resented him for most all of my life because he was more career-minded than anything. I figure we moved some 10 times in 20 years, and it greatly affected me. For a rather long period of time, I am ashamed to say, I hated my father and wanted nothing to do with him. So I must have ended up wealthy, huh? Well, no, not really. Any money that Dad earned off of his little endeavor was lost after an incident that left him disabled. Medical bills being what they are, by the end of it, we were pretty much broke. If you say that patents last 20 years, well, design patents don't. They last 14, but the courts have historically sided with companies infringing on design patents after 7 years, so long as the infringing company develops their own method to produce whatever design is being used and modifies or changes it. I can't tell you what company it was, but a variation of how the owners didn't know, that answer is pure speculation on my part. However, I got the impression that the owners were in their mid to late 20s and trying to act like investors. The company was on offer relatively cheap from what I know, but had a rather long history in the manufacturing field. This is a perfect case of, we're going to come in because we know everything and just completely gut out the company and without doing your due diligence, and it comes back to bite you. What have you done if you were OP? Pro Army Revenge PAR is par for the course, posted by Sloppy Ice Cream. Dear reader, I had an illustrious 21-year career in the United States Army, USA, which miraculously concluded with an honorable discharge. 21 years and 14 combat deployments produce a lifetime of stories. The overwhelming majority of memories are comical and worth remembering, like the time I borrowed another human's truck, or the time I relocated an artillery display in my barracks room. However, some memories are extra ammunition after a live fire exercise, LFX, worth donating to Chuck and Barry. Memories suppressed so well they never happened. However, these memories can be unintentionally triggered. I worked at the bad place before attending assessment and selection. Working there was the sole reason for attending selection. The Bad Place, TBP, was a 3-star command and nursing home for dying careers. TBP was a mixture of National Guard, Army Reserve, active duty, and Department of Army civilians. It was essentially a foreign planet for a soldier who had grown up in Regiment and the 82nd Airborne Division. Overnight, I had transitioned from airborne infantry to the Equipment Tracking Officer. It was my sole purpose in life to source pre-deployment training equipment, or PDTE, for deploying National Guard and Army Reserve units. These units would request specific types of equipment, and it was my responsibility to source at least 2/3 of the requested equipment. I should mention, my boss at TBP was Department of the Army Civilian, DAC. I had 10 years of service under my belt, and it was the first time my direct supervisor was a civilian. Now, I have no issues with civilians, but I do have issues with horrible leadership. Mike was horrible. Mike was a dirty diaper full of crap and always on my butt. Side note, I say that I feel the need to mention TBP recently moved. And you say, moved? Yes, Deep South one day and the Midwest the next. Aliens? Nope, Base Realignment and Closure, BRAC. Wait, what? The Army decided to close some bases and expand others. You reply with, oh, so what's this have to do with the story? OP says, there was 2 active duty soldiers and 2 Department of the Army civilians performing the duties of equipment tracking officers in the Deep South. None of them moved, and all continuity was lost. You reply with, okay, there had to be some kind of transition though, right? Yes, all 4 of them spent countless hours informing me how terrible a human Mike was via email. Oh, story time again. Dear reader, I had no earthly idea what my job was or how I was to perform it initially. Making matters worse, I would quickly learn that Mike had no earthly idea either. Mike only knew what the final product looked like and was mentally unaware of the other 26 letters in the alphabet. Mike was less useful than a blinker fluid and football bats. Fear not, dear reader, it only took 3 months of working, from 5 o'clock to 2300 hours, to garner a nascent understanding of my roles and responsibilities. That's 11 p.m. Thankfully, I had wonderful counterparts at sister organizations. Furthermore, they were all equally aware of how useful Mike was. Fast forward 4 months. The section was still composed of exactly one sloppy, or me. I was 25% of the total allotted manpower, performing 100% of the duties. If you wait until the last minute, it only takes a minute, was my battle cry. Life was grand. I had developed standard operating procedures, or SOPs, and automated matrices to assist me. I was even starting to catch errors from the department that validates equipment requests. Do note, remember, it was my duty to source 2/3 of the equipment request. I had a very unpleasant one-way conversation in August of 2011. Captain Richard Cranium was requesting that I provide 3 Rhino buses for training. Dear reader, I kindly explained why fulfilling this request was unfeasible. Problem solved, right? Nope. I then received a call from Lieutenant Colonel Richard Cranium. I then received a call from Colonel Richard Cranium. The issue quickly became a self-licking ice cream cone of chaos. Ring, ring, ring. I say, the bad place, G4 Equipment Tracking Officer, this is Rank Sloppy speaking. How may I help you, sir, ma'am? Caller says, this is Major General Richard Cranium from the California National Guard. Side note, civilian readers, the Major General is the boss jerkhead for all National Guard soldiers in the state of California. Sloppy or me does not get calls from general officers. Ever. How can I help you, sir? He angrily says, I am calling to inquire as to why you will not fulfill our equipment request. Is it not your policy to provide 2/3? Dear reader, I was now a bit agitated. I had clearly explained the issue to the company commander, battalion commander, and brigade commander. I now have an irate God-level commander on the phone, and 2 courses of action are cycling through my mind. I could kindly explain why this request was absurd, or I could go full regiment sloppy. Slot machine sloppy. Pulls lever. Wheels are spinning and still spinning. Regiment sloppy. Sir, I clearly explained to the previous commanders why I cannot fulfill their request and provided other options. I don't want options, Rank Sloppy. I want my 3 Rhino buses. With my time to get fired attitude, I said, Roger, sir. Well, as I told the previous commanders, there are only 5 Rhino buses that exist on Earth. 3 of them are deployed to Iraq, and the other 2 are in Afghanistan. Do you wish for me to forward this equipment request to Forces Command, 4-star General? Cranium says, oh, that won't be necessary, Rank Sloppy. I say, are you sure, sir? I mean, I can. No, did you explain all this to... I explained it to every single one of them, sir. He says, disregard, I have some phone calls to make. Dear reader, the world was right again. At least I thought it was. It appears that the Major General was slow to contact his subordinate leadership. The Colonel had contacted Mike demanding that I supply his unit with Rhino buses. One would think that a simple explanation would suffice for Mike, but one would be wrong. Common sense is an elusive, fickle creature for Mike. It was like trying to explain what number the letter purple tastes like. Mike says, did you tell a unit they can't have a piece of equipment? I say, yes, sir. Why? Well, because there are only 5 of them and they are deployed to combat zones? Well, you need to figure out how to get them. Is this man frickin' serious? My brain says, laughing, I think he is. I reply, like, call the Pentagon and ask them to redeploy them from combat because some unit needs to train with them? Mike angrily replies, it's not your job to validate equipment. It's your job to source it. Do you understand? With my lip service, I reply, Roger that, sir. Dear reader, when one door closes, check for an open window. I had over 90 units on my desk and 30,000 pieces of equipment to source for the month of August. It didn't take long to find a window to crawl out of. I found a unique request from an infantry unit. They requested a plethora of equipment and it all made sense, minus 4 pieces of equipment. My brain said, pretty sure those 4 pieces of equipment need to be on a different type of request, right? Yeah, but it's not your job to validate it. Oh, right. Dear reader, I sourced it, all 4 of them. It was not an easy task either. I literally had to scour the entire country for available inventory. I made phone call after phone call to make this request happen. None of the items were collocated. They would need to be transported from the far stretches of the continental United States, and failure was not an option. I had fulfilled my responsibilities. I source the equipment and turn it over to Mike for signature. Mike's signature magically allocates funding and authorizes the transportation of said equipment. Dear reader, crap typically rolls downhill. However, this specific request defied the laws of gravity. Crap was going to roll uphill. I crawled back through the window and waited a month for the fallout to ensue. Truth be told, due to my heavy workload, I'd forgotten about my magnificent accomplishment. It was another horrible day at work until I received a magical phone call. Ring, ring, ring. I say, the bad place, G4 Equipment Tracking Officer, this is Rank Sloppy speaking. How may I help you, sir, ma'am? Caller says, hello, I am Sergeant First Class Ricky Bobby. I am the Long Range Surveillance Platoon Sergeant for unit name. Hey, Ricky, how can I help you? Well, I am looking at 4 helicopters and I am told I need to sign for them. Me, in yes mode, I say, let me look at your request. Shuffling noises ensue. Oh yes, you requested 2 UH-60L Blackhawk helicopters and 2 UH-47 Chinook helicopters, correct? Yes, but I requested them for SPIES, which is Special Purpose Insertion Extraction System, and FRIES, Fast Rope Insertion Extraction System Training. I'm not a pilot, what the heck am I supposed to do with 4 helicopters? I'm laughing back and say, once you sign for them, they're yours. I suppose you could try to fly them? Him, laughing, replies, frickin' Army, suppose I could. Don't worry, man, I've got your back. I've already coordinated with our aviation validators, and they're going to support your request. I'll give you their number. Ricky Bobby says, I'm ready to copy. It's 8675309. Thanks, man. Call me back if you have any issues, brother. I'll walk upstairs to G3 operations and get this sorted so you boys can do SPIES and FRIES. We'll go. We'll comply, man. Dear reader, not only does crap roll uphill, but crap rolls uphill faster than I expected. I had just hung up the phone and was departing for lunch. I didn't make it 5 feet before I was beckoned to Mike's office. There are 4 chairs in Mike's office. One with a load-bearing capacity of at least 400 pounds, and 4 normal people chairs. I was awkwardly surprised to find that it was already standing room only. The G4 Colonel, Deputy G4, and G3 Colonels were already in Mike's office. Mike says, it seems we have an issue, Rank Sloppy. My brain's like, we? Really, I'm not aware of any issues, sir. Well, unit name is at Fort Hood, and the battalion commander is wondering why one of his platoon sergeants signed for 4 helicopters? I reply shocked. Did they request 4 helicopters? I can go get the equipment request. I have it right here in my hands. I'm puzzled. I'm like, okay, did they request? Yes, they did. I don't understand. The issue is, the G4 Colonel replies, we needlessly ship 4 helicopters across the United States. G3 Colonel chimes in. There are already helicopters at Fort Hood. Helicopters and pilots there to support SPIES and FRIES training. They are there specifically for this type of request. G4 Colonel says, Rank Sloppy, did this request not look odd to you? My brain is laughing hysterically, but I actually say, oh, absolutely, sir. The entire room with shocked faces, just baffled as heck. G4 says, then why did you source it? Then I go back and retell the entire Rhino Bus saga. Sir, as I understand it, it's not my job to validate, it's my job to source it. Mike made it very clear on multiple occasions. Mike angrily says, "Rank Sloppy, do you realize that you just cost the Army over $100,000 to ship equipment we didn't need to ship?" Sir," G3 chimes in, ticked off, "No, Mike, you just cost the Army over $100,000. Sir." "Mike, it is your signature that authorizes allocation of money and shipping. Did you tell Rank Sloppy it's his job to source, to not validate anything and just only source?" "Sir, I did, but..." G4 Colonel starts walking out. "Mike, let's have a meeting. In my office." My brain thinks, "Oh, that sounds bad." But yeah, Mike, not us. And I say, "Right," and then retreat to my desk. Side note, I know the G3 Colonel. We had worked in the same unit when he was a major. He follows me and sits on my desk. Laughing hysterically says, "How in the heck did you do it?" I'm like, "Do what?" "Find four helicopters." I called everyone. I leveraged my network of contacts and made it my mission. What did your counterpart say about the request? They have the same sentiments towards Mike. G3 shaking his head. Honestly, that's impressive. Sir, I was going to get crap on either way, so I decided, screw Mike. G3 replies, "Yup, screw Mike, I guess." Dear reader, thank you for reading and listening to my petty Army revenge. I have good news. I no longer worked for Mike after that interaction. Other misdeeds stories came to light after that encounter. I had a long desk-side meeting with the G4 Colonel and fully detailed my relationship with Mike. It's nearly impossible to fire Department of the Army civilians, but it was easy to move me. The G3 Colonel found a more suitable position for an infantryman. It also sucked, but he gave me ample time to prepare for assessment and selection. I was at TBP for 18 horrible months before I found greener pastures. I could lament on all the horrible things, but it's not worth it. Why? At least I know where to go if I ever need 4 frickin' helicopters. Cheers, Sloppy. Stiff me on overtime? Cue the long, expensive revenge. Posted by Deleted. This happened in the early 2000s when I joined a startup. We agreed on a salary and no paid overtime and an evaluation in 3 months and then annually. Standard stuff mostly. It was a very mediocre salary for the work, but I really liked the work itself, which was extremely interesting and challenging. For me, even if the finances were so-so, I felt I'd learn a lot of skills which would be useful in the future. After 3 years of having 10 decent clients and a bunch of clients trialing and money rolling in, the talk turned to back pay and paid overtime, plus compensating for past overtime. At that point, around $50,000 in overtime had been accrued, which is a lot. Legally, it couldn't be back pay, so the talk was always of a discretionary bonus. Now, at this point, everyone is okay with this, myself included, and this was discussed in writing via the company emails too, so I felt secure and that no bad will was in play. I felt the company should be able to afford the payment, and equally, I'd happily settle for equity at a discount, which is legally possible there, if cash flow was an issue. The discussions about back pay, possible equity, and now started to drag on, and I was getting irked by this. In the end, I was made an offer of equity, which meant the company valuation was far beyond anything reasonable, in the hundreds of millions, and I'd get a minuscule stake, less than 0.01%, of a company with 9 employees and a projected annual turnover of around 2 million. It was a FU of sorts to stiff me out of my money, and I didn't want to take that lying down. To say I was furious was an understatement. Anyway, the day he made that offer, I handed in my resignation. This sent the CTO into panic mode because the CEO had refused an updated contract and I was still on a 1-month notice period. Plus, I had a lot of untaken paid leave. Basically, it meant that I was walking out right then and there. So, off I went that very same day, to the shock and surprise of everyone, I guess. The next day, I sent an official registered letter requesting my overtime and back pay and received a negative response, which I followed up with another detailed demand. This was also rejected because the bonus was discretionary and, quote, there is no overtime. However, I'd been seeking legal advice and I understood that they don't have a leg to stand on if I am willing to pay for an attorney. As the liability in such matters is firmly and 100% on the employer, I was willing. Now you need to understand that going to a lawyer was very rare in those parts back then, so companies didn't generally expect this outcome, and things have since changed. Now when going through the applicable laws with the attorney, I noticed there is a limitation of 7 years. So, while my attorney was laying out what to do in order to get me my money in as little as a few weeks, I just asked him, what if we wait until it's 6 years and 11 months after the transgression and then file demanding interest? I wanted this because the law stated that back pay is due at a 9% APR above the base rate, which was 3.25% at the time. It's accrued daily for every day past the due date. We're looking at around 12 to 12.5% compound daily APR. The risk is that the company folds in that time, but I decided to take that risk. I sent one final letter stating that I expect, and I quote, all the owed and accrued amounts to date, end quote, to be paid immediately. And of course, nothing happened. For the next few years, life rolled on. The company did grow and become a known player in the area. When the time came, I found an attorney and started the case. We had copies of all the communications, copies of the registered letters and responses. The back pay demanded now, including interest, was $112,000. What I didn't know was that in addition to this, that there are fixed penalties for each instruction to perform uncompensated overtime. The total demand was something like $135,000. To say that the CEO, who was still the CEO, lost his crap would be an understatement. I got a very verbally abusive phone call, which I dutifully recorded as it wasn't completely unexpected, and was added to the filing. The CEO fought, or tried to, but when the judge heard the phone call, he took an immediate dim view. Reading through all the communication just put more nails in the defense's coffin. The judge just ruled and instructed the company to pay immediately and without delay, and also ordered the company to pay all my legal costs. They also got a full audit from the Department of Labor. The company paid up a week later. To add insult to injury, the evening of the court's decision, the CEO apparently got very drunk and crashed his car into another vehicle while drunk. He got a DUI conviction and lost his driving license for half a year, and his insurance refused to pay out for the damages to his vehicle, which is a brand new Mercedes S-Class, as he was drunk. All in all, a glorious day. Terrorize my family, enjoy losing everything and going back to jail. Posted by Raditz Fan 9000. Myself and my wife had just had our second child and moved into a duplex in an amazing neighborhood, had its own playground even. We moved in and greeted the neighbors, bunch of younger people, but they seemed okay. The first day after moving in, we find that they're gone and they've left their 7-year-old on a school day outside of our door with a bag of goldfish and a note asking us to watch him while they went out. QCPS call number 1. The neighbors and me got along really well. The old guy next door repaired bikes for a hobby, and the next door neighbor did woodworking and would always come over to see the kids and send his grandkids over to play too. They warned us that our upstairs neighbors were trouble, constant traffic going in and out, and parties every single night. This was 110% the truth. It got to the point we couldn't sleep at night, and we had multiple altercations to the point that it was full-blown yelling matches. The landlord was useless and would do nothing to get rid of them, so I bided my time, and eventually, one night they came home in their red Mazda 3 and it was destroyed. They must have hit someone and ran, so I called the RCMP to let them know, at least the very least I figured they'd get in deep crap, but oh man, I had no idea what had just unleashed. Turns out the D-bag had a warrant out for his arrest for drug trafficking. He got hauled away in cuffs that night, and there's entitled woman 2 got a visit from CPS again as they left their son home alone again, and this wasn't once or twice, it was every single day. So my wife went digging for names and found the mother on Facebook. Using public record searches, we found out that they owed easy their home nearly $48K in assets as they'd taken off from the original address with all their furniture, including TVs and a huge sound system. 48 hours later, the sheriff was there with a box truck emptying their house. Took the beds, couches, TVs, the annoying subwoofer system, kitchen set, and even the dressers. CPS came shortly after and removed the child from the house. No, look, I didn't enjoy seeing him taken away, but they never fed him, and he was always in the same clothing, and it was falling apart. I mean, we even went out of our way to make sure that he had full meals when we couldn't let this kid starve. The D-bag went to jail for drug possession. He was out on bail, and he hid the drugs in a dresser they took. Entitled Woman 1 went to jail for assaulting the sheriff, and Entitled Woman 2 actually had a happy ending. As far as I know, after she lost her son, she went through multiple programs to clean herself up and started working to provide for her son. I ran into her a couple years ago, and she thanked me for what I did. I got pro-revenge on the drug dealer and his girlfriend, and thankfully helped someone get on the right path. I'll come back so long as Larry isn't there, posted by Reddit admin Dumb87. To give you some background on my friend Tim, made up name, he's been programming since he was like 7 years old. Tim said by the time that he got to college, he breezed through most of his comp sci classes because a lot of the content they were covering he'd already mastered years prior. Tim is an excellent programmer. Tim's career has been quite successful. He's worked for Google, Facebook, Amazon, and finally a hedge fund. The story starts at the hedge fund. Tim works with a lot of AI technology, and at this hedge fund, he was the lead programmer manager who spearheaded an effort to optimize their AI that helped them complete literally millions of trades a day. To say his work had a massive impact was an understatement. All of this going on with COVID-19 in the background, and due to the pandemic, they went to a work-from-home model where my friend Tim kept working. During the work from home, Tim was looking around his fancy $4,500 NYC apartment and wished for things like a yard, heated pool, a nice 3-car garage, and not living in a high-rise. It dawned on Tim that he could leave New York City. Tim moves to Michigan. So Tim moved back to his hometown in Michigan, where he bought himself a really nice home with a heated pool, a 3-car garage, a nice yard, and guess what the yard had in it? A mother-in-love suite, which was essentially a 2-bedroom, 1-bath second home on the property of his main home, which he turned into his man cave. It's actually pretty sick. Oh yeah, and his mortgage payment was far less than his $4,500 month rent, like half. Tim spent the rest of his pandemic work from home pounding out projects and so on. He never actually informed his employer on an official basis that he'd moved. He just kept working. Then the pandemic ended. The pandemic is finally over, back to the office, or... Tim's boss, Larry, calls him up and goes, "All right, Tim, on Monday we're starting work back at the office." And Tim goes, yeah, about that. I moved to Michigan." Larry is shocked and goes, "You didn't even ask if you could do that?" And Tim basically said, "Well, I didn't know I needed your permission to move," in a sarcastic as heck way. Larry insists that Tim needs to move back to NYC or he won't have a place on the team. Tim says he's been doing the exact same work from home at a high level for the past year. He's willing to travel to New York City for a few meetings a year on his own dime, but he feels that his quality of life is so much higher outside of New York City, and he has no desire to live in NYC. To which Larry said, if Tim doesn't have any desire to live in NYC, then he has no desire to keep Tim employed. Now, dear Reddit, what do you think a talented senior programmer with over a decade of experience who specializes in AI technology is going to say to a response like that? If you're thinking that he quit, you'd be absolutely right, he quit. Maintaining complex code can be hard. Now, anyone that has done any programming knows that sometimes the best person to maintain that code is the person who wrote the code. There's logic, there's thought processes, there's just so much that goes into programming that can be so individualistic that it can be hard for someone to take over a code base that they didn't write. John, CEO, enters the picture. 6 weeks goes by when John calls Tim. John is the CEO of the hedge fund. John gets Tim to agree to consider coming back, so that's when John suggests that they fly Tim to NYC and he sits down with John. Tim, however, flipped the switch and said, "No, how about you fly out to Michigan and we discuss this?" Tim said that he said that because he wanted to establish that if he was going to come back, it was going to be him working from Michigan, and if he was going to talk to his employment, it was going to be done in Michigan. John agreed, and 2 days later flew out to meet with Tim. So Tim sits down and John says that they really need him because he provided a lot of value to the organization, and the programming team, they're struggling. John offers Tim the opportunity to come back with a 20% pay cut since he won't be living in NYC, and John called that a cost of living adjustment. To which Tim said, "No, I want a 15% raise above what I was earning." John sits back and responds, "The reason we pay what we pay is because we ask you to live in New York City, and we understand that's an expensive city to live in." To which Tim says, "Hey, you pay what you pay, and you pay it because I'm worth it. If I wasn't worth paying what you pay, you wouldn't be paying me. Now, my first condition is, if you want me back, it'll be a 15% raise." John goes, "And second?" "The second condition is, I'll come back so long as Larry isn't there." John sighs, "Oh, you're asking for too much." To which Tim goes, "You don't need to bring me back if you don't want to. I'll be fine elsewhere." John goes, "I'll talk to the partners." And Tim says, "My offer is good till Friday." John goes, "What do you mean?" And Tim says, "Next Monday is when I'm going to start looking for work. This offer is good until Friday." And it was Tuesday. And then John leaves. That Thursday, the phone rings, and it's John. In conclusion, "Tim, we are transferring Larry to a different fund. He won't be working with you anymore, and we're fine with giving you a 15% raise. Can we send you an offer letter for you to sign?" Tim says, "Of course. And Larry is really gone?" John goes, "Yes, you'll never need to interact with Larry ever again." That was at the start of this year. Tim hasn't been in New York City, hasn't heard from Larry, and hasn't seen Larry on any communications, and so on. Get ready, this one's called Try and Sue Us After Screwing Up, Get Fired Instead. When my second year of university rolled around, I was living with 3 other friends in a property that we rented through a letting agency, which had a ridiculous pun for a name, but go off, and the house was initially perfectly fine. We moved in at the beginning of August and had no problems for a while. When they asked early on whether we wanted to sign a contract for next year, we said sure, and signed a new contract in November due to start the next academic year. We know this was a screw up in hindsight, but we really didn't think we'd have serious issues. However, when it started getting colder in the winter months after a mild autumn, we realized that our boiler was absolutely god-awful. It would fail about once a week, barely heat the radiators, and wouldn't heat rooms, and would need repressurizing each time it died. Being students and not too wise about renting, we just put up with this at first, dutifully emailing the agents every time it broke and waited for them to send someone out. In the meantime, the busted boiler meant that the hot water was dodgy, sometimes cutting out, and that the house was freezing. And, as such, the monthly utility bills were through the roof. One was almost 1.5 times that month's rent. Since the boiler was essentially now a very expensive kettle, and we needed office heaters on almost constantly so we didn't get frostbite. We could constantly see our breath and practically needed to be fully dressed to sleep. This caused issues. Constant colds for one guy, mold growing in the bathroom since we didn't ventilate well as to not lose the little heat the house did retain, and being able to dry our clothes. We didn't have a tumble dryer, just a clothes horse. We were fed up and decided that we wanted out of this new contract. Because we went through an agency, we had no direct contact with the landlord. Every query and contact was through the agents. This is important to remember for later. The agents, while very polite over the phone and in person, were flaky and bad at fixing problems, and it took months for them to send a gas man over. And even then, it was just to renew safety certs, and he didn't even do his job right. So a couple of weeks later, another guy was called out when it broke again. The landlord even comes for this visit just to make sure there's no more screw-ups, and this is our first time meeting her. She was a bit of a soccer mom type, but she seemed to be sorting it, and the issue was kind of fixed, as well as an ancient boiler that really needed replacing could be fixed. This was the last time that we talked to them directly. Through the whole process, my parents had been helping us document things. My mom being a solicitor and my dad a landlord himself, so they knew their stuff. They were grumbling about the agents from the start, but for us, it was easier to just put up with most of the BS since the university work was stressful enough without all of this. Taking the offhand advice given to us by the agents at the beginning of the tenancy, we kept great records and pictures of every document, email, and letters that we received, and took pictures of problems and work being carried out for record keeping. We eventually figured that they'd try and shaft us in some form sooner or later, so evidence was needed. We emailed them over the break officially saying that we wanted out of next year's tenancy. They were amicable and said that if we could get someone else to take it, sure, but were very adamant that if we didn't, we had to keep paying rent for that contract. We have house viewings and we advertise for months, but we get nowhere. At this point, tensions are rising and my mom has taken our challenge as a personal hobby to sort out legally. Since we had initially tried to be low-maintenance tenants and deal with small issues, our contract stated that any issues related to the property needed to be sorted by the landlords or the agents, just in case that we caused further damage trying to do repairs. We instead decided to do exactly what our contract said. We emailed them constantly about every tiny issue that we had, from a broken light bulb to a frosty letter flap. We knew our contracts front to back, the local laws around renting, and asked the university about student renting for specific detail. Getting permission to change a light bulb became a bit of an inside joke to us at this point. Hey, how many working days is it going to take to change it this time? 3 to 5, it's Friday night. We then made sure that we complied with every single thing that they asked us to do in order to leave this new contract, like advertise, accommodate all viewings, keep them updated about anyone who was interested, and so on. We went above and beyond trying to get some poor suckers to take this house off of our hands. We emailed constantly through this for a paper trail, and we made sure that we could document this entire thing. It was stressful, but my parents assured us that things would work out, and knowing that we were annoying them as much as they annoyed us helped. When we move out at the end of the first tenancy and hand our keys in with explicit letters saying that we were not returning for the next contract, we waited for crap to hit the fan. A few weeks later, while I'm on holiday, we all get emails forwarded from the landlord via the agents saying that unless we immediately found new tenants or agreed to stay on, they'd sue us. Scare tactics pretty much. This was also the first time that we'd had an email directly forwarded from the landlord, since usually the agents just passed on any info and so on in their own words. The landlord said they'd had no notification saying that we wanted out of the new tenancy, that this was out of the blue, and therefore they weren't able to advertise for new tenants. So we dutifully sent them a large email with screenshots and pictures of email notifications of house viewings, emails about potential takers, the original emails about us not wanting to take the contract with the date 6 months beforehand clearly highlighted. And then we waited. After a quiet period, we got an almost sullen-sounding email saying that they would drop it if we paid 4 months' rent from the new contract, since although there was an error in communication, we still did not fulfill our end and provide replacement tenants. So out rolls another long email with photos of everything the agents had screwed up, including the dodgy gas man visit. Came to learn what he did was illegal and potentially dangerous, and it was the agent's job to make sure he did his job right. The fact that the new contract signing was botched in the first place due to the agent's error, and one of our housemates had bought a laser thermometer to document how cold the rooms were, sometimes as low as 8 Celsius or 45 Fahrenheit, and had taken pictures of readings, so there was a heavy implication that the house was not suitable for habitation during that time. We haven't received a single email since that, and when the bus goes past the house recently, I see that the letting sign has been changed to a different company, and the house is no longer available through the original agency. So they got fired by the landlords for screwing up so much. I feel smug every time I go past. Is this not just textbook malicious compliance? You gotta do what we say? Okay, we're going to do it, and we win in the end. What would have you done? You want me to stay in my lane? You got it, boss. Posted by Original Tank 5357. Some time ago, I used to work in a medical specialty office. It was ID, or infectious disease, as a medical assistant. Sidebar, I used to work in the food industry and was always told that I wouldn't ever contribute to society or do anything meaningful with my life. While I absolutely loved working as a chef and a baker at the time, I wanted to do more with my life, and I wanted to prove to myself that I'm not as useless as people made me out to be. Not that I believe that for 1 second, but in my culture, if you aren't a businessman or a doctor, you're lower than everyone else. It's pretty terrible, but that's how the culture is. I now live in the US, and it's been pretty good. Back to the story. I had graduated top 3 in my class and was certified through the AAMA and scored in the 90th percentile, so I knew my stuff. But I've never worked a white-collar job in my life, so I was afraid that I would seem, out of place. I did my externship at this ID clinic in my town, and they loved my interpersonal skills. They loved my work and stated that I would be offered a job at the end of my externship. I was elated. I was just so happy to have a job secured and to have a foot in the door to the medical field. It turns out my blue-collar experience had helped me relate with a lot of our patients, and they appreciated my work more for it. As my time went on, my experience working in the medical field became less about the money and more about the people that I can help with my direct patient care. They weren't just charts, MRNs, medical record number for those non-medical folk, and diagnoses. They were Jeff, who ran the local farmers market, or Meg, who worked with kids at the Y. I cared for my patients, and our repeats would always look forward to coming back to see me and have a chat. I loved working with my patients. So at the end of my externship, I was extended an offer of employment for a decent amount of money. It was more than my other classmates were offered at their practices, but still not a whole lot. And I took it. I was to be the medical assistant in charge of direct patient care. This meant checking in, rooming, dealing with prescriptions, performing and searching for labs, packing wounds, and doing dressing changes. Being officially part of the office now, I was determined to work my butt off and show myself and my colleagues that I could do it. I continued to do my work and care for patients. However, over time, I would notice certain things that weren't in my job duties that I could do that would help care for the patients. Certain things like calling their doctors for updated orders or checking for records from local hospitals. Also, helping patients find good home health or SNFs, which are skilled nursing facilities. It's generally, though, the medical scheduler's job. This also included looking into insurance coverage or billing and checking referral statuses for referral coordinators, among other things. Doing these tasks meant a bit more work on my end, but it also meant the best care that I could offer for my patients. This went on for a year, and my patients were happy and willing to come to appointments. Apparently, not a whole lot of people like to come to a building that has the words infectious diseases in big print on its side. Then one day, out of the blue, I'm called into my supervisor. Young, naive me thought, oh great, they finally see how hard I'm working and I'm finally getting recognized. Maybe they'll promote me to lead. Nope. My boss, Shelly, told me that I'm working too hard and sticking my fingers into too many pots. I asked where this was coming from, and she stated that I was staying more than 5 minutes late too many times, and it's because I'm doing too much work. She said, "We can't keep paying you all this overtime." I think I was maybe making 30 minutes of OT at most. She said that's still too much. I'm doing too much work. I was baffled, absolutely stunned. I thought I was doing the practice of service, but she undermined the entirety of the last year's hard work that I put in. I was frustrated and I was a bit upset, but I tried my best to remain professional. So I asked her what she would like me to do, and the next words out of her mouth were ones that she would come to regret. "Well, I see you're doing a lot of tasks that are meant for other positions. Maybe you should stop doing those and just stay in your lane." She then proceeded to write me up for trying to abuse the time clock. Insert a Jim Carrey, alrighty then, and cue malicious compliance. I asked her to send me a list of exactly what my job duties are, which she was happy to do. It listed most of what I originally was meant to do, except it didn't include dressing changes and packing wounds. I saw this and immediately knew this would be trouble for my boss. You see, she was the only other medical assistant on our end of the office that was certified to deal with minor wound care and dressings. At that point, since I was the main contact for patients, that would fall onto her plate. So I told each of my patients that I won't be doing any of that extra work because it goes against the practice's wishes, and I was told not to. All of them understood, but it's tough to get patients to keep appointments when things are delayed. Not long after the order was issued, I got my first page for a wound pack. Excellent. One thing to note about my boss is that she absolutely abhors feet. And one thing to note about infectious disease clinics is that we dealt with a lot of diabetic foot infections, at least 2 or 3 a day. Doc wants to see how it's healing, so he removes the wrap and unpacks the foot. Spent a little extra time with the patient and now has to get to his next appointment. I'm paged by the doc to pack the foot, wet to dry. No problem, doc, let me get Shelly for you. He then gives me a kind of odd look, but continues to his next appointment. Shelly gloves up, and as soon as she passes the threshold of the room and notices it's a diabetic foot, she's holding back her gags and immediately sweating. I pass by the room and she asks for my help. As calmly as I could, I turned and said, "Sorry, boss, packing wounds isn't on my list. I can't do it, just staying in my lane. By the way, the 2 o'clock in 3 is a through and through foot infection. Probably should get that packed soon too." I'm glad we were wearing masks because she couldn't see the massive crap-eating grin that I had on my face throughout that whole encounter. She tried to write me up about disobeying superiors, but I'd spoken with my GM and she was behind me. Instead, she ended up getting written up for trying to put wound packs back on my list after she told me I did too much work. She ended up having to do part of the medical scheduler's job, part of the referral coordinator's job, and part of the billing office's job as she let go one of our front desk staff because there was not enough work to go around. There was plenty of work. I was doing it. She didn't last long after that. The burnout got to her and she stepped down from her supervisor position 4 months after that. They ended up hiring another super, and I left the practice shortly after that I got the vid. They told me to come back into work after 3 days, and still very symptomatic, so I told them I wouldn't endanger my patients like that and to shove it. Last I heard, they have an entirely new front office staff, and they're perpetually short-handed. Shoulda let me drive my own path instead of staying in your silly lanes. Stop bothering us with that deadline. We've got this. Sure thing, kids. Posted by Rare Cheesecake 9701. Some background. I, 27 female, work in IT. I'm a well-respected and known member of the IT party circle where I live, so to speak. I am not jaw-dropping, but people know me and I have a very good reputation. One of the things is that I got to the point in my career when I wanted to give back, so I started mentoring others. Mostly, I mentored adults or those who are closer to me in age. Career advice, how to apply for different exchange programs that can boost their professional growth and improve their speaking and writing skills. The usual. But I always was one up for the challenge, and I decided to try and mentor kids. It's not a secret that IT and STEM are increasingly popular right now, and more people want to get into the field. Therefore, there are myriads of boot camps, hackathons, and mentoring programs for all ages. So I signed up for one such program as a mentor. Teach kids how to code with blocks, tell them what AI is, and how to develop an MVP. It sounds more complicated than it might look at first glance, especially when you're an educated professional with a degree, explaining concepts that are rather complicated to children who may have less than 1/50th of your tech knowledge. I must add that participation in the said program gives kids credits and can help them get into better schools or even be eligible for some university scholarships later in life. So only pros, if you ask me. The only thing is that they must upload their MVP project to the site before the deadline. I was assigned 2 teams. Primary, which is early middle schoolers, Team A, and high schoolers, which is Team B. Both had 5 members, and the youngest in Team A was 8 years old. I thought, oh my goodness, that will be tough, thinking about Team A and how I am up for a tough time. Also, since they are so young, the parents of the kids must observe Team A meetings and my lessons, and parents equals problems. Ironically, despite my worries, even with help from the parents, the kids in Team A were doing great. But the same can't be said about Team B. A little side note, with my mentees, I have 2 rules. 1. At least 1 meeting per week. At least 50% of the group must be present. 2. Communication. When I type something, like task to do or reply to a question asked before, I ask my mentees to respond. Not even text. A thumbs up emoji will also suffice. We all know that red status doesn't mean much when you can accidentally open an app for a second or swipe it to clear RAM on the phone. So, Team A attended all the meetings and responded to my assignments. There was a curriculum provided by a program to follow, and they were very receptive overall. Team B started okay, but then started not showing on meetings and leaving assignments read but unresponded. I understand they have a lot on their plate, exams are no joke, but they disregarded my time, which I will not be okay with. I have a job to do, and mentoring in that program was 100% volunteering, and there was no payment for the mentors. There was, however, a very strict deadline. The middle of April, when their MVPs must be loaded onto the website for later judgment. I, even when ticked, am a professional first and an angry lady second. So I wrote multiple messages asking for updates on the project, with warnings at the end that, deadline is April 15th, don't miss it. After one such message, the so-called leader of Team B, Sam, wrote to me this. Hi OP, I know that you probably mean well, but you only bother the team with those deadline messages. Can't you, chill out? When we need you, we'll contact you and all. Just get off our hair and, let us do our job. I'm sorry if this hurts your feelings. It is what it is, heart. After I read that message, I was like, what the heck? But I did respond that I would stop messaging if that caused tension within the team. Though the deadline is still on the 15th and the site would reject any application that was uploaded after. Just stop, okay? Jeez, said Sam to that, so I decided, okay, I'm washing my hands out of this. Cue malicious compliance. Since that message, I haven't written anything to Team B. I had scheduled no meetings, updates, or checkups about the curriculum and their understanding, and definitely not a written reminder of the deadline once. Deadline came. Team A uploaded their project with no issues, and their parents even bought me a nice box of chocolate as a thank you gesture. Just like the deadline came and went, Team B started bombarding chat, asking me to help because something is wrong with the site. We can't upload our project. I entered the chat and said, yes, it will not upload. No, it's not an issue with the site. The deadline has passed, so if you try to upload, it will only show you an error message. I warned you, kids. No extra credits, no nothing. The rules of that program are simple, but they are hard, no exceptions ones. Team B tried to blame me, saying that as a mentor, it was my job to ensure that they would succeed. And I reminded them that my job as a mentor is to provide support and guidance, keep track of their progress, and to remind them of the deadline, which, all of the above, they, via Sam, asked me not to. And since I respected their boundaries, I did exactly what they had requested. They can sulk as much as they want. I have all our communication in writing, so they don't have a leg to stand on when trying to accuse me of sabotaging them and their program. Haha. Tough luck, kids. Bad boss gets his just reward. I am a pharmacy technician and I've primarily worked in long-term care pharmacies. These operate like warehouses and they're closed to the public. The majority of our business comes from nursing homes and assisted living facilities. The drugs are packaged in such a way that any unused portion of the prescription is sometimes able to be returned, and the patient would receive a credit on their bill for that fill. So if they take 30 pills, cost $30, but they only take 10, they could get a credit on their account for the $20 worth of pills that they didn't take, and we would be able to resell those pills. Long-term care pharmacies also tend to supply things like IV pumps and fluids, compounded drugs like specially made creams, and other supplies like dressings for wounds and syringes. Now for our story. I was forced to quit my job right at the beginning of last month by my lovely ex-boss that we will call Bob. Prior to my quitting, I was the only purchaser for the entire pharmacy, meaning that I bought everything that we used. The primary thing that I purchased was, of course, drugs. Now, the scale of our operation was nothing like your local CVS. When I left, we had 13 facilities, the largest of which had 300 patients alone. The majority of our patients were medically complex and needed 5+ prescriptions each. My average daily cost for just drugs would easily go into the mid-5 figures. Every day I would check in and log every single prescription that came in and put it away. This alone could easily take 2 to 3 hours depending on the size of the order. In addition to this, I was responsible for sorting and processing all those prescriptions that could be returned. Usually they came back to the pharmacy in 55-gallon trash bags, and I would usually get about 10 bags worth a week. I was taking care of all the IV equipment, including tracking where it was and when it needed to be serviced. I was also responsible for ordering our packaging and shipping supplies, coordinating shipments, ordering all the office supplies and break room necessities like coffee. On top of it all, I was required to do a brief inventory every day to make sure that we didn't run out of any prescriptions and that we had everything that we needed to get through to the next business day, in addition to weekly and monthly counts of other select items and drugs. Basically, it was a lot, and I generally felt that it was too much for one person, particularly for what I was being paid. Enter Bob. Bob had actually cold called me and offered me the purchasing job. We had worked together before, although I never worked directly under him. The job he was offering had a lot more PTO and a higher wage than where I had been, so I left. Stupid me. Everything went fine for several months, until one day Bob asked me why I was destroying a lot of certain expensive drug while processing returns. I explained to him that the patient's insurances had denied the credit and that it had to be destroyed per the law. Well, he then asked me to simply mark out the patient info and put it back on the shelf. Ladies and gentlemen, that is fraud. As in, go directly to jail, do not pass go, do not collect $200. But seriously, if I had complied and an inspector had caught me, I would be writing this from my prison after taking a second mortgage on my house to pay my fines. Obviously, I told him that I would not be comfortable with that, to which he said, really? Well, I guess I'll just have to do it myself. He never did, to my knowledge, but after that day, something changed. He started to get pretty short with me, but by that point, I was about done being overworked and underpaid while being asked to commit felonies, so I started looking for another job. He, of course, found out. Not that I was really trying to hide it. Stupid me again. He called me into his office one chilly March morning and then said, "I've actually been meaning to talk to you." And I pretty much knew then and there that my job was done. And I tell you what, I have never felt more panicked and free all at once. He tells me that he doesn't think I am happy working there and that he knows I've been looking for other jobs. I tell him, yeah, that's the case. We discuss how I feel overworked and underpaid, and he says that he thinks my attitude has been off lately and that I'm not reliable because I'm sick a lot and how that's just not going to work out for him. Then he drops not one, but 2 bombs. The first bomb. He says that he just thought that I was smart enough that I could pick up the job without really getting any training, but that he found out that wasn't the case. Ouch. I reminded him that I'd never worked that kind of job before, and he, surprisingly, conceded that maybe he could have had me trained better, even though there were never any complaints about my performance by him or anyone else. And then he drops the second bomb. He had already hired my replacement. She could start in early April. He would give me the choice to be fired, or because he, quote, likes me as a person, end quote, I could quit and spare myself having to explain to future employers what had happened. I told him that I would need to think for a few minutes and excuse myself. I called my mom, best friend, and husband and told them all what happened and that I would be quitting, and all fully supported me. By the way, he was generally a butt to me. I walked back in and I told Bob that I quit. He was shocked. The conversation went like this. I said, "Bob, I quit." He replies, okay, today? Uh-huh. Right now? As his eyebrows are going up. Yep. Then I stuck out my hand and he gave me the most pathetic limp-noodled handshake that I have ever gotten. I went and I cleaned out my desk, punched out, and went to every single coworker and told them that I had enjoyed working with them and that I was sorry it couldn't continue and Bob had felt that it was best that I move on. Most of them were shocked. One of the pharmacists cried. I left in the middle of the day, leaving over a week's worth of returned drugs to process, a half-unpacked daily shipment, and nobody trained to even do half of my job. Now, dear reader and listener, you may think that this is the end of the karma that my boss had to endure, but it's not. Not even close. A week later, COVID made its bold appearance on our shores. As a result, the replacement purchaser decided to back out. Bob had to scramble and ask one of the remote technicians to come in and be the purchaser because she was the only one that he could convince to do it. Except, here's the thing. She's refusing to take the position until COVID is over and done with. That leaves good old Bob to do all of my work and all of his. Last I heard, he was coming in at open and staying until close to try and keep up with it all, and was ticked about that. Guess he overplayed his hand and got what he deserved. This is a perfect case of, you don't understand what I do, and you take me for granted, you get me out, boom, and look what happens to you next. What would have you done? Work during my planned vacation? Then you have to pay me extra when I leave. Posted by Shabuti. Here we go. I'd been working at this company for about 3 years. I'd been consistently growing in my role and eventually was given a project to own with 1 or 2 other team members if needed, but it was a major project with a quick turnaround. I determined that I could do it myself, though it would be tight, and since I was hoping for a promotion, I took on the project solo. I was able to deliver the project slightly ahead of schedule and with better quality than expected, which allowed us to make a huge sale. The head of the company gave me an award at an all-hands meeting for the work I did, and my boss let me know I was on track for an end-of-year promotion with a nice pay raise and more responsibilities. But I was needed in another part of the business, so I was going to have to transfer under a new manager that was notoriously hard to work with. I transferred to this manager, and the first meeting we had to get on the same page, I brought up that I had a 3-week planned vacation in 4 months. I had never taken vacation, so I had 6 weeks saved up, and I didn't want to start losing it. He told me, of course, that it would be fine and we would be able to make it work. About a week later, we have our first meeting with our product team. They had a new large project idea and wanted it to be released in just 3 months. As my team looked over the details, we knew this was a 6 to 8 month project at best, and it would be better to deliver it in smaller increments so that they still had something to show in 3 months, or we would need to push out the schedule. My boss was adamantly against both, so throughout the next week, he made us have last-minute 3 to 4 hour brainstorming sessions every day, but he would not even tell us until around 3 p.m., forcing all of us to work late every day that week. At the end of the week, there was no way we could figure out how to deliver everything on the shorter timeline, and so my boss asked me to stay behind after the meeting. For another hour, he railed against me, saying I was failing at this project and that he could not see me getting a good annual review in the next 4 months and that a promotion wasn't even on the table. This annual review would also include the project that I had just received an award for and is supposed to encompass 12 months of work, but he was basing this off the first 2 weeks on the new team. At this point, I knew he was ready to use me as a scapegoat for his bad management and started applying elsewhere. We continued working on the project, and sure enough, at the end of 3 months, we were still far from being able to deliver, and my boss was getting heat from up above. Right around this time, I received an offer for another company that would be the promotion I wanted and an even larger pay increase. I accepted the offer and negotiated my start date to be after my vacation, which was now 3 weeks away. That same day, my boss calls me into his office and tells me, "We need to talk about this vacation." I reminded him that we talked about it months before and that everything is booked, flights, hotels, and so on. He would not let up and told me there was no way that I could take 3 weeks off with how behind schedule we are. He told me I could go on my trip, but I could not take vacation and would be expected to be online during our business hours throughout the trip, 4 a.m. to 1 p.m. local time in my vacation spot. Cue malicious compliance. Every morning while on vacation, I would log on at 4 a.m., check emails, answer questions on our internal chat, and do the minimum work expected, logging off as soon as it hit 1 p.m., all without burning any vacation. With 1 week left in my vacation, I requested a conference call with my boss to give him my 2 weeks notice. He was shocked and tried everything to get me to stay and finish out the project, including bringing back up a possible promotion. I told him that I'd already accepted a job with the start date upcoming. I worked my last 2 weeks before moving on to my new job. Because my boss required me not to take vacation, the company had to pay out all of my accrued vacation once I left, which was a little less than 7 weeks at that point, including the 3 weeks I had originally planned to take. Now short-staffed, I heard from other coworkers that the project missed 2 more adjusted deadlines, and eventually the manager was demoted before being let go from the company. About 6 months later, the head of the first company asked me to lunch to offer me a role taking over my former boss's old position. I negotiated an even higher pay raise increase as well as company equity and ended up going back there for 3 years. Vacation is vacation. You don't work on it unless it's an absolute crazy emergency, if that, and then to have it pulled out under the rug like that, oh man, malicious compliance, 10 out of 10 from me. You want me to fly 12 hours earlier because it's cheaper? Posted by Warm Tomato 2126. I, a 56-year-old male in the UK, was working in Africa as an operations manager for a large global security company from 2009 to 2014. The company I was working in had been through a long civil war and was very underdeveloped. Think like no paved roads, people living in very traditional African lifestyle, so on. At the time, I'd been working there on 10 weeks in country, 2 weeks at home rotation for about 4 years. I'd flown to and from work so often that I had the journey down to the bare minimum travel time, and it worked out the cheapest option for the company because the travel days were paid from when I left home. The shorter my journey, the cheaper it worked out for the company. Now, someone in the head office had looked at cutting down on travel costs, probably to make themselves look good and get promoted. As a result, I got an email after a week at home saying that they had changed my normal flight, which was 5 p.m. on Sunday from my nearest UK airport via Amsterdam, then on to Nairobi, connecting with a 9 a.m. flight to the war-torn country on Monday morning. The change was from a 5 p.m. departure to a 5 a.m. departure the same day, same route, and saving about 80 pounds. Now to clarify, the 9 a.m. flight from Nairobi was the first flight to the war-torn country because the destination airport was the only surfaced runway in the country. It had had no runway lights or radar, so all flights had to be in daylight. Anyway, I agreed to the flight time change, but they had to move it to Monday so I don't lose a day at home, which all become clear in a moment. They had agreed because it still saved 80 pounds on the ticket. No skin off their nose. Once I got the flight confirmation, I contacted the travel desk asking for hotel and taxi bookings. When they asked why, I said that I need these, and I explained that to make a 5 a.m. departure, it required a check-in at 3 a.m. So I needed a hotel at the airport on Sunday night because no trains were running to get up the 3 hours to the airport from home at that time of the morning. The flights they booked would get me into Nairobi for 7 p.m. after dark, so I'd need a hotel there and a taxi each way to and from the hotel to get me onto the 9 a.m. flight on Tuesday. the same flight I would have been on if I'd left at 5 p.m. but a day later. A couple days go by and I got a phone call from the company travel desk telling me that the travel plan was confirmed. I was on the 5 a.m. flight with a hotel reservation at my UK airport the night before, a hotel in Nairobi after landing, and my taxi would collect me in Nairobi and drop me off at the airport for my final connection. I asked about the cost savings. They said £80. I then asked about the hotels and taxis. They replied, "Oh, they don't come out of our budget, that's the operations budget, so you're fine." I was happy. I was arriving back at work a day later, still paid the same amount with a night out in Nairobi to sweeten the deal. My boss, on the other hand, went nuts. Nobody had told him of the changes. My deputy flew out on the plane I flew in on, meaning I didn't get a handover of the work that was going on. On top of that, of the cost of the hotels, the taxi, and the extra day's pay had all come out of my boss's operational budget. I think the total amount added was almost £1,000. But hey, they saved £80 on that flight cost. When companies split their budgets up like this and they want to save money and they don't think about the whole big picture, this happens. Way to go, OP. Stop fixing the photo printers during Christmas rush? Sure, why not? Posted by the audiophile. To preface, I used to work in the photo lab of a very prevalent retail pharmacy. You know the one. I was good, fast, efficient, and it always provided the most excellent customer service. Customers loved me. I adapted official procedures to make them better and improve the final project, and I fixed the photo printers. If you've worked in a 1-hour photo lab, you know that no one fixes those things. They jam constantly, overheat, never get replaced or updated. They'd break at least weekly, if not more. Same thing with the kiosk and receipt printers and POS system. It's a nightmare. I haven't worked there since 2017 and they finally updated the pin pads 6 years later. Because the printers would break so often and I had experience fixing printers from when I worked at a school, I'd just whip out a screwdriver, open them up, and fix them myself. It was faster and easier than putting in a ticket, and it meant that I could keep churning out orders during peak instead of being 1 to 2 printers down at all times. Now, shortly before the holidays, we got a new AM. He'd previously managed another store, but had to step into a less stressful position due to a heart issue. The guy was a prick, and he created stress for himself. He treated team members like garbage, and most people were too afraid to stand up to him. I had a good working relationship with our GM, so I was not afraid of this guy, and he would often single me out because of it. At one point during Christmas rush, he caught me with my metaphorical pants down, screwdriver out, and disassembling a printer that had suddenly stopped working. He chewed me out, told me to stop fixing the printer immediately and just put in a ticket. If he caught me fixing a printer again, he'd have to take disciplinary action. Cue malicious compliance. I stopped fixing the printers and just put in tickets. In about a day, we were down to one functioning 4x6 printer that was overworked to heck and back. That printer almost caught fire while I was off shift because no one was able to unjam it. He never told me to stop fixing the printers again and left me alone the entire rest of the time that I worked there. I ended up being wrongfully terminated due to an ADA leave for a major surgery when corporate never got my paperwork despite my PT faxing it over, and I found a better job that I love at a company I still work for. Brick manager ended up getting fired several months later for customer complaints. This right here, if you ever see an incident of management not understanding what the workers are doing, this is it. You just totally told a worker to stop doing something that they were really good at and helping the company just because you didn't know. OP, you win. They lose, you win. Right? Am I right here? Surely I'm not the only one. Don't expect me to follow some of your rules and ignore others, posted by Faithlessness Type 45. In the 90s, I was working for a company that sold pagers and airtime. You know how long it takes at the cell phone store to buy and activate a new phone? It took that long or longer to activate a pager. I was the lowest person paid on the premise and the only hourly employee. Quite often, I would be helping customers as 5 p.m. came and went, and sometimes had as much as an hour overtime on my time card. When I was hired, I was given an employee handbook that stated that working off the clock was a fireable offense, so I kept careful track of my hours, which were verified by my supervisor. I did this for about a month before both my supervisor and her boss advised me that I could not put in for overtime any longer. I asked my supervisor what I was supposed to do at 5 o'clock, continue working the counter or work off the clock. She was furious, but told me to leave, and I did. every day at 5 o'clock on the dot. OP, you did right. They told you to go, you go. Get paid overtime, you're not working off the clock. That's just crazy, right? 2 for the price of 1, posted by Gulthing Dan. So I was laid off. No big deal, right? It happens. But in this instance, it's a little different. I was working at a tech startup and was one of the early employees. I was one of the key people to develop their technology, which significantly helped them enable to raise tens of millions of dollars. I was told early on that they would basically take care of me as the company grew. Well, for a time at least, the company grew leaps and bounds. Again, much in part to the excellent tech I helped develop. Yet the company had little concern for little old me. Meanwhile, they brought on a bevy of new managers and high-level people, and yet my career was basically stagnant while I was there. But then, things started to slow down due to economic conditions. There'd been a couple of layoffs, and I figured it was probably time to leave the sinking ship. So, I lined up a new position at another company. I then went into my manager and told him that it seemed like more layoffs were imminent and that I had secured a job offer at another company. I asked him if it would be a good idea if I should take it, and he said that he would let me know. A couple of days later, after he had discussed things with our CEO, they said I was okay and not to take the other position. I turned down the other position because I had invested so much of myself into this company, even having sold my house and moved hundreds of miles to work at this company. And I still had a lot of stock options that I was hoping would be worth something someday. Literally a couple of weeks later, guess what? Yep, they laid me off. Now, that other position was no longer available, and because this was at the height of the recession, I was out of work for 4 months until I found another position. I could have even lost my house during this time, and I had to sell some cool stuff to keep paying the bills. The new position I finally found was much further from home and was a financial hardship. I would have been better off if they had just been honest with me and told me to take the offer I had had in hand previously. But honesty wasn't ever their policy. Anyhow, before I was involuntarily separated from the company, I was working with a Fortune 500 company that was trying to partner with us on some technology. After leaving, I got wind that they were going to invest $15 million in the company. That bothered me for several reasons, mostly because most of us were pretty sure that the crooked CEO was pilfering the company for personal gain. I'm thinking that this guy shouldn't be rewarded for his atrocious management of the company, and honestly, I didn't think that it would be a wise investment for this large company. I contacted my inside guy at the Fortune 500 and told him some of my concerns about the stewardship of the money at the startup and that it wasn't really a wise investment. This company was looking for a distribution deal for our technology, so I told them the best use of their money would be to make a deal to exchange a large blanket purchase order for stock. This way, the startup company would still get a big chunk of investment money coming in, but they would have to perform for it. It's the difference between giving a kid an allowance for no reason at all, or giving a kid an allowance based on if they did their chores or not. I didn't necessarily want the investors to walk away from a partnership because I had many friends still at the company and didn't want to see them out in the cold. So my thought was that this was a type of deal that would keep the company afloat while minimizing the potential for pilfering and better protecting the investment. All in all, if structured right, it could be a win-win and make it much more difficult for the crooked CEO and his cronies to loot the company. I additionally told them that I wouldn't recommend investing a penny unless they got a seat on the board of directors. That way, they would have first-hand knowledge of some of the shenanigans going on behind the scenes with their money. That was about it. Now they were armed with some additional information and tactics to perhaps better protect their investment, as well as help ensure that, if they did invest, everything would be above board. Sometime later, I heard that the CEO pulled the entire company into the conference room and showed them a new one. He was furious because the investor had somewhat done what I suggested. They had dropped their investment from $15 million to $5 million and had come up with some sort of blanket order or something along those lines. I'm not quite sure, but in essence, it meant a $10 million loss in the mind of the CEO. He's a bit of a fat slob, so it's quite unfortunate that he didn't just have a heart attack right then and there. Not surprising, in the process, the investor was denied the board seat, and one can only guess why, dirty secrets and all. In fact, one of the board members that the CEO did bring on the board had already done time for defrauding his clients. A marriage made in heaven, I guess. So, not necessarily meant as a revenge, but sweet nonetheless. The company basically lost $10 million because of what they did to me. They were all but expecting this money. Had they not laid me off, I probably wouldn't have even thought about putting the investor's interest above that of the corrupt company. In the end, surprising to no one, the investor eventually got majorly screwed by the unscrupulous startup company anyways. The two companies had some disagreements about their distribution agreement, and the investor ended up having to pay a major settlement to the startup company after a contentious mediation. But never fear, don't screw with the Fortune 500. As the startup company was starting to gasp its last breath, they were working on a promising deal with another company they had identified as a major potential customer, one that would put them back on the track to financial success and further line the CEO's dirty pockets. Well, the Fortune 500 company got wind of this deal, bought the other company, and then shut down the deal. That's ninja-level revenge. So, in the end, 2 nuclear revenges for the price of 1. I couldn't have been happier to hear about the karmic justice once again hitting the company. Now, the company is all but dead. All physical assets went to auction. The CEO is milking the last few dollars out of the account, but because our SEC, or Securities Exchange Commission, is all but worthless, he'll start another venture and the cycle will repeat itself. The sad thing is that the CEO, in my humble opinion, makes Elizabeth Holmes, the CEO of Theranos, look like Mother Teresa. I pray that one day they do a Netflix docuseries exposing all that went on at the mess of a company. I can guarantee you, it will be quite a hit. Buy my program when you fire me? No? Okay. I was employed at a rather large factory, which is one of the largest plant-based companies in the world, recently bought by an investment firm not so long ago. Anyways, I developed a program which was used at the factory. It could tell whenever any machines were not running, even if it was due to a manual stop or anything else. My program knew the reason why the machine was idling. This program made it so much easier for the entire factory. Workers were happy because they didn't need to do any manual work and write down every time the machine stopped. Lead up to about a year ago. The factory appoints a new chief. All the old employees that were in a leader position were let go because it was time for, quote, new blood to come in, end quote. There was a lot of talk about selling off parts of the factory, including machines and so on. This included programs that I had developed, including the program that identified whenever a machine stopped. I developed this program on my spare time. I showed it to the old management and they liked it enough that they wanted to use it on every station in the factory. Every machine was to use this program, and all that had to be done was for the program to be maintained weekly. This was around 5 years ago or so. When the newly appointed factory chief wanted to let the old employees, me included, leave, it was not known that I was the person behind that program. Anyways, at my meeting with HR and the factory chief, I said that I was willing to sell them the program and teach someone how to maintain the program. The factory chief laughed in my face and said that it was company property and that it was simply their program and not mine. I offered to show them the source code and everything, but it led up to the point to where if I was to tamper with the program before my departure, they would sue me. I was officially let go. 2-month countdown began, and after 2 months, I was free. After a week or so, they noticed problems with the program. It would stop loading, stop registering stops, and it would mislabel stops. I knew that this was when the fun was about to begin. After about a month, I was called into the office and was told that I had tampered with the program because it had suddenly stopped working. I let them know that someone had to maintain it. I was ordered to teach someone how to do that job, and I told them, well, after you pay me for the program rights. They wouldn't budge, and I was told to return to work. When I had a week left, I strolled around the factory floor for a while and noticed that no stations were running my program anymore. I asked some operators why that was, and they told me it just stopped working. Now we need to fill out forms every time the machine stops manually. I shrugged and told them to thank the factory chief. I left after that week. I got a phone call about a month after I left where they begged me to sell them the rights and teach someone how to maintain it. I never sold them that program. Instead, I sold an improved version to another factory nearby where I am now employed. Now, I see some people say that I'm in the wrong based on US law. Just editing here to let you know that this didn't take place in the US. I made the program during my spare time at home on my own computer. After introducing the program to the former factory chief, I was allowed to try it out on one machine and test it. The maintenance was done on my office computer, and after a few months, I was allowed to roll it out for the entire factory. It wasn't done overnight. There was lots of debugging to do. I have not heard anything from the company for nearly a year, so it would be weird for them to just suddenly come after me now. Just wanted to make that clear. This sounds like a classic case of, we're the company and we're going to do it right. Oh, we need to listen to the people that work there on the ground floor. Have you ever seen this happen? Let me know. Fire me for speaking up. Enjoy going out of business. Posted by LOL What Mufflers. Many years ago, I worked at an automotive repair shop that was owned by a very nasty person. This person actually had 2 shops that he ran, and the best way I can describe him was as a tyrant. Both shops had cameras, and he would watch us work from the comfort of his home. If he saw something he didn't like, such as taking a 5-minute smoke break or not sweeping for a half a minute during downtime, or if he just wanted to bust balls, he would call the shop and harass us. Or, better yet, at times, show up and harass us in person. In addition, he would regularly berate us for no reason, threaten to not pay us because the shops weren't busy, and would have an absolute meltdown if you dared question his authority. It was spectacular in the worst of ways. After working with him for a few months and dealing with his shenanigans and getting sick of pointless arguments with him, I started reconsidering my employment there. Around the same time, the owner decided to move me from one shop to the other, really for no reason other than likely to try to push me out, as that was what he did with a few people that I'd already worked with. Odd coincidence being that I had not discussed my thoughts of leaving with anyone, but I digress. I genuinely disliked the idea of working at this other shop. It was older and a bit run down, plus it was in a pretty terrible area with high crime. But I wanted to line something up elsewhere before I jumped ship, so I made the move. This is where the beginning of the end started for old Mr. Owner. Once I got settled into the new shop, I got to talking with my fellow technicians. As it turned out, the owner was unsurprisingly an anti-race scumbag, and every single one of the employees at this location, aside from me, was African American. I'll spare you the details, but let's just say it's a miracle that the owner came into the shop, said what he said, and walked out breathing. In addition, he would regularly send people home with no pay for the day just to be a butt. This went on for a few weeks, him coming by, being nasty to all of us, and I was over it, and I was just about to leave as I had lined up other employment. The other techs were also over it. I went to give the owner my 2-week notice via phone, discreetly, which I should have known wasn't a great idea, and instead of discussing it like a human, he decided to come down and talk face to face. Well, our friend was so incensed that I put my notice in that he forced me to clock out and go home, and also forced 2 other techs who decided to stand up for me to do the same. I decided that I had enough of this guy's crap, and that not only did he deserve to have some kind of reciprocation against him, but the other techs deserved better than to continually be walked on. So I filed a complaint with the Department of Labor and outlined everything. Within a few days, they launched an investigation, and of course, the owner found out who filed the complaint and called the shop and gave me heck about it, stupidly, because the phones he had were on recorded lines. Guess who I had request to listen to that conversation? In the end, I was terminated by him prior to my 2 weeks being up, as were the 2 techs who stood behind me. I filed for unemployment, which he fought me on by filing appeals with the judge, then not showing up 3 times in a row. This prompted the judge to bar him from requesting appeals against me and granting me full unemployment pay. Months later, I got a written letter from him extending an apology and offer to work for him again. 2 months later, I got a letter from the DOL, Department of Labor, saying that the investigation was closed and that he had been found guilty of multiple charges and was barred from operating a shop or any other business in the state for several years. Fire me from my job with no notice? I'll ruin your entire company, posted by Acrobatic Ad 2952. So, start of December, I was let go of my job because they didn't have the time to train me for the job role. I needed to take out a loan to survive, as it took me 3 weeks to find something new. I was hired for customer service administrator role, and as I'd never done that type of work, I was told that I'd be given full training on the job. The girls in the office never bothered, and I simply learned the job myself. I was told my performance was more than they expected, but suddenly I was called in the office at 8:30 a.m. when I arrived and told they were really sorry, but they didn't have the time to train me, so I would be let go immediately with no warning or notice, and I was completely shocked by this. To add, my contract stated that I was to be given 28 days notice of termination. The company I worked for uses government grants as a form of payment, so they would regularly claim that they had done certain things they haven't to make more profits from the government, such as forging signatures and lying about what work they've done to gain more funding. Basically, we get funding from the government for providing services to lower income customers. That's all I can say. I was involved in a different department, but shared an office with the department responsible for lying about profits. It's a small company, and the director would constantly hassle them to forge signatures as we can get the jobs through quicker, and if we had an audit, he would go to prison for what was being done. So, when I got laid off, not by a manager, but someone who worked same level in my department, I was absolutely livid that they dragged me in a 60 to 80 minute drive for me to leave 2 minutes later. I got home and immediately called the fraud whistleblower helpline. Nothing came of this until a week later when they wanted more details. The thing is, I'm very good at being silent and taking in my surroundings. I was able to tell them which accounts had been forged and lied about. I also had considerable email evidence of what had been going on. So, long story short, majority have lost their jobs, including the people who couldn't be bothered to train me and went running to the director to fire me, including the director who is now being investigated for fraud and facing time in prison and a massive fine. Always live by the mantra, mess around and find out. So, you want us to adhere to the company hierarchy? Sure, posted by Zokoman. So I work as a mechanic in a sewage treatment plant, and it's a very laid-back job. In fact, 3 out of 8 hours was spent not working. I know it sounds like we were just a bunch of freeloaders, but it's because the tasks we perform are simple, and we do our best to do them ASAP. Anyway, the hierarchy in our plant is quite complicated, but the most important thing is that as a part of a mechanical department, our only supervisor on site is our master. At least I think that's the English translation. And both plant manager and plant master are not our supervisors, yet they, as well as other workers, asked us to carry out some jobs for them, which we gladly agreed to do, even despite most of them being out of our range of duty. You know, welding racks back together, installing a new faucet, and so on. Most of the time, we weren't doing anything else anyway, but sometimes we were preoccupied with our own tasks. Still, the plant master always told us that his tasks were more important and to just leave what we were doing for some other day. Due to this, many of our old tasks were left for another day, which because of constant requests were left sitting for months. Still, it was always his jobs that had the priority. Now is the right time to address the tense situation we had with the plant master. He's best buddies with the manager, usually blaming all the shortcoming of his team on us. Stuff like something not being cleaned, sick, stuff that's not mechanical failure, stuff that's simply not important enough, or stuff that's beyond our competencies and should be taken care of by a specialist company. He also had this very annoying habit of rummaging through our tools, taking parts and using our machinery without asking. It's very annoying, but whatever, it's important to keep a good relationship in work. But then he dropped the bomb. He had the list of all our old tasks that were left unfinished. The list wasn't that long, by the way, about 8 things, 3 of which were outside of our competencies, and said that the manager and CEO will be waiting in the conference room to give us a lecture and to take away our bonuses. The meeting went very roughly. It started with the CEO saying, "You can say goodbye to your bonus this month," and then proceeded to give us a lecture about the importance of our tasks. Then he kept blabbering about us, threatening our master, the plant master, being the only supposed witness, and so on and so on. When the CEO was talking about possible solutions, the plant master did the worst calculation of his life. He proposed adhering to the company structure and proper workflow. Well, we didn't want to oppose since we knew what that means. We talked this over with our master, and now every time the plant manager and master want something to be done, we reply with, "We don't take jobs in the corridors. We have our jobs to do, sorry. We can't afford to leave what we're doing. We have it planned for today." Or, "Does our master know about this? We cannot do anything without him ordering it to be done." By now, no one has been to our workshop for 4 weeks. No extra jobs, no side jobs, nothing. Only 2 tasks a day that usually take 30 minutes each with a team of 5. And it's all by the book. We definitely respect the company's structure and have a proper workflow, focusing on our tasks. And by the way, most of the backlogs were also due to stuff breaking down, which is mostly due to a faulty infrastructure. Most of the pipes are clogged with sedimentation from PIX, PAX, which are coagulants, and require thorough cleaning and rebuilding. But I guess it's cheaper to simply replace a pump which had to push the same amount of sewage through pipes that have been narrowed by 2 times at this point. Those poor pumps. And yeah, the pipework and technology is the responsibility of the plant master and plant manager. Since you like these stories, click the video on your screen so you don't miss out on more. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you there.